On a freezing night in Chicago, 80-year-old Elijah Brooks, a poor black laborer, finally walks into a luxury boutique to buy the blue dress his wife Martha has dreamed of for years. Every coin in his trembling hands was earned through pain, sweat, and sacrifice. But the saleswoman judges his worn clothes and skin before counting his money, humiliating him when he comes up $50 short. Just when love seems crushed by cruelty, one manager's decision changes everything and turns their anniversary into a miracle. Before we begin, tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The south side of Chicago wore winter like an old wound. By 4:30 in the afternoon, the sky had already faded into a cold gray sheet, and a bitter wind hissed through the narrow alleyways between brick buildings blackened by age, smoke, and years of neglect. Snow from 2 nights earlier still clung to the broken sidewalks in dirty patches, pushed against rusted fences and overflowing trash bins. The city's distant traffic hummed beyond the neighborhood like another world, one brighter, warmer, and farther away than it should have been. At the far end of one of those cramped alleys stood a small brick house with a sagging roof and a crooked iron gate that no longer closed properly. That was where Elijah Brooks lived. Elijah was 80 years old, an elderly black man whose body had been shaped by decades of labor and hardship. He stood a little taller than average in his youth, but time had bent him forward into a permanent stoop. His once powerful shoulders were now narrow beneath a worn brown work coat, and his hands, large, rough, and scarred from years of lifting scrap metal and dragging heavy crates, looked older than the rest of him. Deep lines cut across his dark face, and silver-gray stubble framed a mouth that rarely complained. His tired brown eyes still carried quiet strength, the kind built not from pride but from survival. What made Elijah who he was had never been one tragedy, but many. He had spent his younger years in factory work until the steel plant shut down in the late 1980s, a closure that broke the backs of many black families in the neighborhood. Since then, Elijah had taken whatever work the city's forgotten corners could offer, hauling scrap, cleaning warehouses, unloading spoiled produce at the market, shoveling snow, carrying things younger men no longer wanted to touch. Pain had become part of his routine. But love had, too. Inside the house, the smell of cabbage soup and old wood smoke lingered in the air. His wife, Martha Brooks, sat near the small radiator by the window, a faded blanket draped over her knees. Martha was 76, a slender black woman with warm brown skin softened by age and years of quiet endurance. Her silver curls were tucked neatly beneath a soft knitted scarf, and though pain had curved her posture slightly, there was still elegance in the way she sat. Her hands folded carefully in her lap. Her face was gentle and oval-shaped, lined with wrinkles that deepened when she smiled. Her eyes, dark and observant, still held the softness Elijah had fallen in love with nearly 6 decades ago. Martha's kindness had been sharpened by hardship, not weakened by it. Years of chronic back pain had made it difficult for her to move far beyond the house, and most days she only crossed the few feet between the bed, the stove, and the chair by the window. Yet she never allowed herself bitterness. Even in poverty she found ways to laugh, to tease Elijah, to make old things feel less broken than they were. That afternoon she looked up as the gate outside creaked. "Elijah?" she called softly. The front door opened and Elijah stepped in carrying a sack of coal briquettes over one shoulder. Before he could lower it, a smaller figure hurried in behind him. That was Noah Carter, the 12-year-old boy from next door. Noah was tall for his age, skinny as a fence post with warm brown skin, bright alert eyes, and tightly curled black hair hidden beneath a red wool cap that had clearly belonged to someone older. His oversized coat hung loosely around him, sleeves rolled up twice. He moved quickly, always eager to help, his personality bright and sincere in a neighborhood that often forced children to grow hard too soon. Noah had lost his father 3 years earlier to street violence, a wound that had made him unusually protective of the older people in the alley. Elijah, in many ways, had become the grandfather figure life had taken from him. "I got the door, Mr. Brooks," Noah said, hurrying forward. Elijah smiled faintly. And I suppose you plan on carrying the coal, too." Noah grinned. "If you let me." Together, they carried the sack toward the small stove. As Elijah bent down, a sharp pain shot through his right knee. His expression tightened for only half a second. Noah noticed. "You okay?" Elijah straightened slowly, forcing a calm smile. "Just old bones reminding me they're still here." But it was more than old bones. For months, the pain in his knee had been getting worse. Every day at the warehouse market, every crate, every bent step, every pull of the scrap cart sent a deeper ache through the joint. Some nights it pulsed so hard he lay awake staring at the ceiling. Still, he had told no one. Not Martha, not Noah, not even himself, not really. Because in a life built on surviving one day at a time, there was no room for weakness. Later that evening, after Noah left with a promise to return in the morning, Elijah sat across from Martha at their tiny kitchen table. The table itself was old oak, scarred with scratches from years of meals, bills, and repaired household items. A single yellow lamp cast a warm circle of light between them. Martha reached beside her chair and lifted a small wooden box, polished smooth by decades of careful handling. This box mattered. It was no bigger than a shoebox, with tiny carved flowers on the lid. Inside it, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, were their wedding photographs. Elijah watched as she opened it. The top picture showed two young people standing in church clothes on a sunny June afternoon in 1968. A younger Elijah, proud and straight-backed. A younger Martha, radiant in a borrowed white dress. Martha smiled. "Do you remember how nervous you were?" she asked. Elijah chuckled. "I remember, sweating through my only good shirt. You kept apologizing because you couldn't afford flowers. And you said I looked richer than every man in the church." Her laugh was soft, almost musical. Then her eyes drifted toward the frosted window, beyond the alley, beyond the neighborhood. "You know," she said almost casually, "when you passed downtown yesterday, was that blue coat still in the boutique window?" Elijah looked at her. There it was again. The coat. The turquoise blue women's coat displayed in the window of Evelyn's boutique, the elegant fashion shop on a polished avenue miles away from their neighborhood. Martha had seen it only once months ago when Elijah took her by bus to a clinic appointment. Ever since then, it had stayed in her mind. She smiled to herself. "If I ever wore something that beautiful," she said jokingly, "I'd feel young again." She meant it lightly, but Elijah did not hear it lightly, because he knew what that coat represented. Not vanity, not luxury, but a memory of the woman she once was before pain, bills, and years reduced life to survival. In his mind, he could already see the coat hanging in the window, glowing beneath boutique lights while city people passed by without a second glance. He had passed it himself every evening on the long walk home from the market, and every time he stopped. Just for a moment, just long enough to imagine Martha smiling in it. Later that night, after Martha had gone to bed, Elijah stood alone by the kitchen sink, rubbing his knee in silence. The house groaned softly in the wind. The anniversary was coming. 58 years. In all that time, he had never once bought her something truly beautiful. His gaze moved toward the tin can above the cupboard where he kept spare change. Pennies, nickels, folded dollar bills. Not enough, not yet, but perhaps soon. Outside, the Chicago wind rattled the loose gate once more. Elijah looked toward the darkness beyond the frosted window and made himself a promise. Before their anniversary came, somehow, he would bring that blue coat home, and for the first time in years, the cold did not feel as heavy as the dream warming his chest. The next morning came harder than the one before. Chicago's winter had settled deeper into the south side overnight, wrapping the alley in a brittle silence, broken only by the scrape of distant snow shovels and the rattling cough of buses forcing their way through frozen streets. A pale sunrise struggled behind layers of cloud, casting the neighborhood in a dull silver light that made every brick wall and rusted fire escape seem even older. Elijah Brooks was already awake before dawn. His knee had throbbed through most of the night, a deep, grinding pain that spread from the joint down into his shin. But when the first gray light touched the frosted kitchen window, he pushed himself up from the chair where he had fallen asleep. He moved slowly, so Martha would not hear the sharp breath he drew when his legs stiffened. The promise he had made to himself the night before sat in his chest like a second heartbeat. The blue coat, their anniversary, her smile. That was enough to make pain feel negotiable. By 6 o'clock, he was outside, shoulders hunched against the cold, dragging his metal scrap cart toward the freight district near the bus depot. The wheels squealed against cracked pavement, and every few steps he had to shift his weight to spare his knee, though he never stopped moving. The bus depot was already alive. Delivery trucks backed into loading bays. Men in thick gloves shouted over stacks of produce crates. Steam rose from sewer grates and mingled with the smell of diesel fuel, wet cardboard, and melting snow. Elijah's first extra job of the morning came from Frank Doyle, a broad-shouldered white dock supervisor in his late 50s. Frank had a thick beard gone almost fully gray, a heavy wool cap pulled low over pale blue eyes, and the permanently stern face of a man who had spent 40 years yelling over engines. But beneath the rough exterior was someone practical rather than cruel. Years earlier, after losing his own brother to alcoholism and homelessness, Frank had become softer toward the city's older laborers, especially men like Elijah who still worked without complaint. "You're early again," Frank muttered, pointing toward a pile of produce crates near the loading bay. Elijah gave a faint smile. "Morning work pays the same as afternoon work." Frank grunted. "Not if your leg gives out first." Elijah said nothing. For the next 2 hours, he carried boxes of bruised apples, wilted lettuce, and canned goods too dented for store shelves but still heavy enough to punish his body. The younger workers moved faster, but Elijah worked with a rhythm built from decades of repetition. Lift, breathe, step, lower. By the time the truck yard quieted, he had earned $20. Not enough, but closer. From there, he pushed his cart toward the industrial blocks behind the old rail line, where broken appliances, twisted metal fencing, and discarded pipes often collected beside abandoned lots. He spent the late morning gathering scrap iron, aluminum siding, and copper wire stripped from old construction debris. Each piece dropped into the cart with a metallic clatter. Each sound became another small step toward the boutique window downtown. By noon, snow had begun again, light and dry, blowing sideways between buildings. Elijah's third job was one he had started taking only this winter, shoveling snow from the entrances of small storefronts along Madison Avenue. The pay was poor, but cash was immediate. At a corner laundromat, the owner handed him $8. Outside a bakery, he earned $5 and a stale dinner roll. At a pharmacy, a woman paid him $10 and thanked him twice. It all went into the inner pocket of his coat. Coins, bills, crumpled singles. By late afternoon, exhaustion sat heavily in his shoulders, but instead of going straight home, Elijah made one more stop. He turned toward downtown. The city changed block by block as he walked. The broken sidewalks of the south side gave way to polished stone. Graffiti disappeared beneath clean storefront glass. The air smelled less like smoke and more like roasted coffee and perfume drifting from restaurants. And then he saw it. Evelyn's boutique. Warm, gold light spilled through the enormous display windows, glowing against the blue-gray dusk. Mannequins in elegant coats and dresses stood beneath soft spotlights like silent royalty. And there, exactly where it had always been, hung the turquoise-blue coat. Its color seemed even richer against the winter evening outside, deep, luminous, almost alive. Elijah stopped at the curb, one hand resting on the cart handle. For a long moment, the city disappeared. He imagined Martha wearing it in the kitchen light. Her silver curls brushed neatly beneath the collar. Her eyes bright with the kind of joy poverty had taught them to postpone. Then the traffic light changed, and the spell broke. He walked on. Back in the alley that evening, the familiar squeak of sneakers on snow greeted him before he reached the gate. Noah. The boy jogged over, carrying a bulging trash bag over one shoulder. Noah's cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, and his bright brown eyes gleamed with excitement. His red wool cap was dusted with snowflakes, and his oversized gloves looked too big even for his coat sleeves. "What's that?" Elijah asked. Noah lifted the bag proudly. "Cans, bottles too, from the basketball court, the diner, and behind the gas station." Elijah blinked. "Why?" Noah shrugged, suddenly shy. "I saw you counting money last night through the window." Elijah's expression softened. The boy shifted awkwardly. "I figured scrap is scrap." Inside the bag, aluminum cans clinked together. There must have been dozens, perhaps hundreds. For a moment, Elijah could not speak. Then he placed a rough hand gently on Noah's shoulder. "You've got a good heart." Noah grinned. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to protect." When Elijah entered the house, warmth greeted him. Martha sat by the lamp again, this time with a needle and thread in hand. Across her lap lay Elijah's brown work coat. She looked up with a small smile. The sleeve was tearing. Martha's hands, though older now, still moved with remarkable precision. Years ago, she had taken sewing jobs from neighbors when factory work disappeared from the neighborhood, mending shirts and hemming dresses to keep food on the table. The long nights of stitching by weak lamplight had left her back worse than ever, but they had also made her patient, careful, and fiercely resourceful. Elijah sat beside her. "You should be resting. And you should stop pretending that coat can survive another winter without help." Her smile was teasing, but there was sacrifice beneath it. She always found ways to preserve what little they had. A coat repaired, soup stretched 2 more meals, a candle saved for special nights. She glanced toward his pocket. "Good day?" Elijah touched the money hidden there. "Better than yesterday." Before Martha could answer, a hard knock rattled the door. The room fell still. Elijah opened it to find Mr. Leonard Price, the building owner, standing beneath the weak porch light. Leonard was a tall, thin black man in his early 60s, dressed in an expensive camel coat and polished shoes that looked painfully out of place in the alley. His face was narrow, his lips thin, and his sharp eyes always carried the restless calculation of someone who had once known poverty and now feared it returning. Years of clawing his way into property ownership had made him practical to the point of cruelty. "Evening," Leonard said flatly. Elijah nodded. "Something wrong?" Leonard glanced at the sagging roofline, then at the neighboring units. "Taxes are going up, repairs too. Starting next month, rent goes up $75. Martha stiffened behind the table. Elijah's stomach tightened. 75, the number struck harder than the cold. Leonard offered no apology. "I've got bills too." Then he turned and disappeared back into the snow. The silence he left behind felt heavier than his footsteps. That night, long after Martha had gone to bed, Elijah stood alone in the kitchen. He took the old coffee can down from the shelf above the stove. Inside were the coins and bills from the day. He added Frank's 20, the snow-shoveling cash, the scrapyard payout, and Noah's can money he had quietly exchanged at the corner recycling machine. The coins clinked as they fell. A beautiful sound. Still not enough. But closer. Much closer. Elijah replaced the lid and held the can in both hands. Outside, the city wind rattled the alley gate once more. Tomorrow he would work earlier, lift heavier, walk farther, because somewhere beneath boutique lights, that blue coat was still waiting. And now the race against time had become even sharper, not only for love, but against rent, pain, and the slow cruelty of winter itself. The morning of their 58th wedding anniversary arrived beneath a pale Chicago sky, cold enough to turn every breath into smoke. A thin layer of overnight frost clung to the alley bricks outside Elijah and Martha's small home, making the world look strangely polished, as if even the south side had decided to dress itself for the occasion. The winter wind was calmer than usual, and for the first time in days, the silence before sunrise felt less like loneliness and more like anticipation. Elijah Brooks sat alone at the kitchen table before Martha woke. The old coffee can rested in front of him. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. Its faded red label had almost peeled away, and the lid was bent slightly on one side from years of use. Yet, to Elijah, it had become something far greater than scrap metal and old tin. It held frozen mornings, aching knees, bruised hands, Noah's cans, snow shoveled in darkness, and every hour of labor he had stolen from his own exhaustion. Slowly he opened it. Coins spilled onto the table with a soft metallic rain. Pennies, nickels, quarters, worn $1 bills, a few folded tens, and the 20 Frank had pressed into his hand the day before for staying late to unload a truck. Elijah counted once, then again. Then one final time, lips moving silently. $450. Not enough for comfort, but close enough for courage. He carefully sorted the money into small paper bundles, wrapped the coins in pieces of old newspaper, and tucked everything into the inner pockets of his repaired brown coat. Martha's stitching from the night before still held the sleeve together neatly, the seam nearly invisible. When Martha awoke, Elijah was already standing by the door. Martha Brooks looked especially gentle in the soft gray light of the room. Her silver curls framed her face loosely this morning, and though the familiar ache in her back made her rise slowly from bed, her expression carried a quiet warmth. She had no idea what day would bring, only that Elijah seemed unusually calm. "You're leaving early?" she asked. Elijah smiled, careful to keep the secret in his chest. "Just one errand before work." Martha tilted her head, amused. "On our anniversary." He stepped close enough to kiss her forehead. "Especially on our anniversary." Her eyes softened with the same love that had survived 58 winters beside him. As Elijah stepped into the cold, his knee reminded him of every year behind him. But today the pain felt almost ceremonial. He walked past the alley, past the bus depot, past the warehouse blocks where he had spent decades bending his body for wages too small to remember. For once, he did not stop for work. Today, every step led downtown. By late morning, the city had transformed around him. The streets near Michigan Avenue gleamed with polished storefront glass, expensive cars sliding past in silence, and people wrapped in elegant coats that probably cost more than his month's rent. Christmas lights still hung across some buildings, though the holiday had passed, casting warm reflections over marble sidewalks. And there it was, Evelyn's Boutique. The shop stood like a jewel among the neighboring stores, its tall windows glowing gold against the winter air. Soft white mannequins posed beneath crystal lights, wrapped in silk scarves and tailored coats. The turquoise blue coat still stood at the center of the display, rich and luminous beneath the spotlight. For a moment, Elijah simply stood outside. His reflection in the glass startled him. An 80-year-old black man in worn boots, repaired sleeves, and a face carved by labor. But behind the reflection, the coat waited. For Martha. That was enough. He reached for the polished brass handle and stepped inside. Warmth wrapped around him immediately. The air smelled of expensive perfume, fresh roses, and polished wood. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, scattering soft light across marble floors so clean they mirrored every movement. Gentle piano music floated from hidden speakers, making the entire boutique feel less like a store and more like a world designed for people who had never worried about rent. Elijah's boots left faint traces of melted snow near the entrance. He noticed it immediately and instinctively wiped them twice against the mat. Then she approached. Vanessa Cole moved toward him with graceful precision, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She was a woman in her early 30s, tall and slender, with pale skin, sharp cheekbones, and sleek, dark blonde hair tied into a flawless low ponytail. Her makeup was immaculate. Her fitted black boutique uniform perfectly pressed, and her voice carried the polished smoothness of someone trained to sound pleasant while keeping distance. But beneath that professionalism lived impatience. Years of working in luxury retail had taught Vanessa to judge customers in seconds. Shoes, watch, coat, posture, skin, hesitation. Growing up in a struggling suburb with a mother obsessed with social climbing had left her terrified of ever appearing poor herself. End-of-month sales pressure only sharpened that fear into cold efficiency. Her eyes moved over Elijah from head to toe, the patched sleeve, the scuffed boots, the trembling hands. Then came the practiced smile that never touched her eyes. "Sir," she said coolly, "these pieces are expensive. Please be careful." The words were polite, the meaning was not. Elijah gave a small nod. His eyes had already found the blue coat. He stepped toward it, slowly, almost reverently, as if entering a church. The fabric looked even more beautiful up close, soft wool, tailored lines, silver buttons, and a velvet collar that caught the light like water. Elijah raised one hand, but stopped short of touching it. "May I see this one?" he asked quietly. Vanessa followed his gaze. For the first time, something like irritation flickered in her expression. That coat had been part of the winter showcase line, one of the most expensive items still unsold before inventory closeout. Her manager had already reminded staff twice this week that high-ticket pieces needed to move before month-end numbers were finalized. Still, she lifted it carefully from the display rack. "This one is from our signature collection," she said, voice clipped. $500. The number landed heavily. Even though Elijah had prepared himself, hearing it spoken aloud made the money in his pocket suddenly feel smaller. 500, exactly as he had feared. He swallowed, then slowly reached into his coat. One bundle at a time, Elijah placed folded bills and newspaper-wrapped coins onto the glass counter. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Around them the boutique remained hushed. At a nearby rack of silk scarves stood Margaret Whitmore, a wealthy white woman in her late 60s, elegant and poised, dressed in a cream wool coat with pearl earrings and gloves tucked neatly in one hand. Her silver blonde hair was styled in soft waves, and years of old money refinement gave her a composed stillness. Yet unlike Vanessa, Margaret's eyes held thoughtfulness. Widowhood and years spent funding city charities had made her more observant of quiet suffering than most of her social circle. She pretended to browse, but she was watching. Elijah began counting. His hands trembled not only from age but from the humiliating intimacy of poverty laid bare beneath crystal light. 10, 20, 50. Coins rolled softly against the counter glass. Vanessa crossed her arms, glancing once toward the office hallway. In the back office, unseen by the floor, Claire Bennett, the boutique's 45-year-old manager, sat before a wall of security monitors reviewing sales footage and end-of-month inventory numbers. Claire was a composed black woman with warm brown skin, shoulder-length curls, and sharp, intelligent eyes behind thin, gold-framed glasses. Years of rising from assistant cashier to manager had made her disciplined, but the memory of her own father's years as a hotel janitor had preserved something rare in luxury retail: empathy. On one of the monitors, she noticed Elijah at the counter. She leaned forward. Back on the floor, Elijah counted again, carefully separating the quarters. The blue coat lay folded between them. So close. Close enough to imagine Martha's hands touching the fabric. Close enough to feel hope. But the stack on the counter was still unfinished, and Elijah knew, even before the final coins were counted, that the margin between love and humiliation had become painfully thin. The chapter ends there. With the money still being counted beneath the chandelier light, the coat waiting on the glass counter, Vanessa's patience fraying, Margaret silently watching, and Claire beginning to pay attention from the office. The chandelier light above the glass counter seemed brighter now, almost cruel in the way it illuminated every coin Elijah Brooks had laid out. His rough fingers moved more slowly than before, quarter by quarter. Folded dollar by folded dollar. He counted once, lips barely moving. Then again, this time separating the stacks more carefully. The boutique remained hushed, except for the soft piano music drifting through the air and the faint metallic clicks of coins touching glass. Around him, the polished marble floor reflected his bent frame, making his age and poverty feel even more exposed beneath the store's elegant glow. Vanessa Cole stood across from him, arms folded tightly. The practiced patience in her face had disappeared. Her pale features had sharpened into visible annoyance, her jaw tense beneath flawless makeup. End-of-month numbers, commission pressure, and the humiliation she associated with poverty all pressed together into a brittle coldness. To Vanessa, Elijah was no longer a customer. He was a delay, an inconvenience, a disruption standing between her and the polished order of the boutique. Elijah finished the final count. He stared at the small stacks, then counted one last time. The result did not change. $450. Exactly 50 short. For a moment, his heart simply stopped inside him. He had known it was close, but hope had made him believe effort might somehow bend numbers. It never did. His fingers rested on the counter beside the blue coat, just inches from the velvet collar he had imagined around Martha's shoulders all winter long. Vanessa exhaled sharply. "Well," she said, the softness gone from her voice, "that's not enough." Elijah lifted his eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "I thought maybe—" But before he could finish, Vanessa reached forward with a sudden, impatient motion and snatched the coat back off the counter. The sound of the hanger scraping across glass cut through the room. A few nearby customers turned. Vanessa's heels clicked as she stepped backward, holding the coat away from him as though it had been endangered simply by proximity. "Sir, you're holding up the store over $50, she said, louder now, making no effort to lower her voice. The piano music continued. So did the silence of everyone listening. Elijah's face tightened. He reached instinctively toward the bundles of coins as if gathering them quickly enough might somehow erase the moment. "I'm sorry," he murmured. But Vanessa had already crossed the invisible line from irritation into cruelty. Her expression hardened, and the insecurity that had always driven her surfaced as contempt. "You really shouldn't touch merchandise like this if you can't afford it," she said. "If it gets stained, wrinkled, or damaged, you'll be responsible for the full price." She looked pointedly at the damp edges of melted snow near his boots. Then came the words that cut deeper than the price. "And if you can't pay for damage in a place like this, people do go to jail." The sentence hung in the air, a quiet, deliberate humiliation. Not shouted. Worse, spoken with enough calm to make it sound like a warning instead of an insult. The boutique's atmosphere changed instantly. Two women near the scarf display turned fully now. A man by the entrance paused mid-step. At the silk accessories section, Margaret Whitmore's gloved hand tightened around the scarf she had been pretending to examine. Margaret's chest stirred with an old memory she had not expected to revisit. When she was 17, long before wealth had insulated her life, her widowed mother had once taken her into a department store in Detroit wearing a coat with a torn sleeve. A sales clerk had followed them aisle by aisle, convinced they might steal. Margaret had never forgotten the shame in her mother's lowered eyes. Now, watching Elijah, she saw that same look beginning to form. Elijah lowered his head. The old wool cap in his hand suddenly became the only thing he could focus on. It was a simple, dark knit cap, frayed at the edges, one Martha had mended twice already. He held it against his chest now, as if it might shield him from the stares collecting around the room. "I didn't mean any trouble," he said. But trouble had already become spectacle. At the far end of the boutique, the front door opened. A gust of winter air swept briefly across the marble. A small figure hurried in, breathless. It was Noah Carter. The 12-year-old boy stood just inside the doorway, his oversized coat dusted with snow, curls peeking out from beneath the red wool cap. His young face was flushed from running, and his bright brown eyes widened immediately as he took in the scene. Elijah at the counter, coins spread everywhere, customers staring, Vanessa holding the coat away. Noah had come because Elijah had been gone too long. In their neighborhood, time mattered. A trip downtown should not have taken this many hours, especially on a day Elijah had called an errand. Something in the boy's chest had told him to follow. Now he understood why. "Mr. Brooks," Noah said softly from the entrance. The sound of the boy's voice only deepened Elijah's shame. He had wanted Noah to see him as strong, steady, not like this. Vanessa glanced toward the child with irritation, then back to Elijah. "This is exactly what I mean," she said sharply. "This isn't a place to gather crowds." Meanwhile, in the back office, Claire Bennett's eyes remained fixed on the security monitor. Every angle of Vanessa's posture, every customer turning, the moment she pulled the coat away. Claire's warm, brown face had gone still, but her gaze sharpened behind gold-framed glasses. Her own father had once been humiliated in a downtown hotel lobby where he worked maintenance because a guest assumed he was stealing his own lunchbox. The memory had stayed with her for 20 years. She knew the tone Vanessa was using. She knew what it meant. Still, she did not step out yet. Not yet. She needed to see the full truth before intervening. Back on the floor, the whispers had started. Soft, controlled, far more painful than open ridicule. A young couple near the fitting mirrors exchanged glances. A woman in designer boots leaned closer to her friend. Margaret Whitmore finally turned fully toward the counter, no longer pretending to browse. Her elegant posture remained composed, but behind her calm face, old wounds were stirring. Poverty, she remembered, did not just empty your pockets. It made strangers believe your dignity was negotiable. Elijah carefully gathered the bundles of money from the counter. His fingers moved slower now, heavier. Each coin he picked up felt like the weight of a failed promise. The turquoise coat disappeared back onto its velvet hanger, back into the boutique lights, back behind the invisible wall between dream and ownership. Noah took one hesitant step forward. "Mr. Brooks, maybe I can—" Elijah gently raised a hand, stopping him. No, the boy had already given enough. Without another word, Elijah placed the last newspaper-wrapped roll of quarters into his pocket, slipped the old wool cap fully into his hands, and turned toward the door. No one stopped him. The marble floor seemed longer now than when he had entered. Every step echoed softly. He could feel the stares at his back, the kind born not always from cruelty, but from the discomfort people feel when forced to witness someone else's humiliation. At the door, he paused only long enough to place his cap back on his silver hair. Then he stepped out into the freezing Chicago air. Behind him, the murmurs inside the boutique continued. Ahead of him, downtown lights blurred against the gathering dusk, and Elijah Brooks walked away with empty hands, lowered eyes, and the sound of whispered judgment following him into the cold. The chapter closes there, exactly within the outlined moment of public humiliation, with Elijah leaving the store in shame, Noah witnessing the aftermath, Claire seeing everything through the cameras, and Margaret silently remembering what poverty once felt like. The cold outside felt sharper after the heat of humiliation. Elijah Brooks had made it halfway down the block, his shoulders bent against the Chicago wind, when the boutique's golden glow behind him began to blur in the corners of his vision. Not from snow, not from age, from the quiet weight of disappointment pressing behind his eyes. The city moved around him as if nothing had happened. Luxury cars whispered past over wet pavement. Couples in expensive coats stepped around puddles without ever glancing toward the old man walking alone, with his hands deep in his worn pockets. Downtown Chicago remained polished, bright, indifferent. Beside him, Noah Carter struggled to keep up, his sneakers splashing through thin slush at the curb. "Mr. Brooks," the boy said softly, breathless from both the run and the emotion still tightening his voice. "I'm sorry." Elijah shook his head without looking up. The old wool cap sat low over his silver hair now, shadowing the shame still written across his lined face. "It's all right, son," he said quietly. "Some doors were never built for men like me." The words were calm, but Noah heard the pain beneath them. Before the boy could answer, another sound cut through the wind. Fast footsteps, heels striking pavement. Then a woman's voice, urgent and clear. "Sir, please wait." Elijah turned slowly. Running toward them from the direction of Evelyn's boutique was Claire Bennett. At 45, Claire moved with the kind of composed strength that came from years of carrying responsibility without ever showing strain. Her dark wool coat was unbuttoned from the rush, revealing the crisp cream blouse and tailored black slacks she wore beneath. Her warm brown skin flushed pink from the cold run, and her shoulder-length curls had loosened slightly around her face. Thin, gold-framed glasses caught the streetlight as she stopped in front of Elijah, catching her breath. Yet even winded, Claire's presence carried calm authority. She was not a woman who raised her voice often. Years of managing difficult clients, demanding owners, and ambitious staff had trained her into steady control. But the moment she saw Elijah leaving through the security monitor, something older than professionalism had moved her feet before her mind finished the thought. Her father. The memory was instant. Samuel Bennett, a tall black man with powerful shoulders and kind eyes, had spent 32 years working as a janitor in a downtown hotel. Claire still remembered being 9 years old and watching him come home with cleaning chemicals on his sleeves, hands cracked from bleach and winter air. One Christmas Eve, a wealthy guest had accused him of stealing a bracelet that was later found in the woman's own purse. Samuel had come home silent that night, dignity bruised but intact. He had only said one thing. People who've never struggled think money buys the right to decide who deserves respect. That memory stood beside Claire now as vividly as the freezing street itself. She steadied her breathing and looked directly at Elijah. "Sir," she said gentler now, "please come back." Elijah stared at her, uncertain. Claire's gaze dropped briefly to the coins still bulging unevenly in his coat pocket, then lifted again. "I'd like to offer the coat to you for $450. For a moment, Elijah did not understand the sentence. The city noise seemed to fade. Noah's eyes widened. Even the passing headlights across the street blurred into stillness. Elijah blinked once, as if afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too quickly. "But," he began, voice catching, "the price—" Claire gave him a small, steady smile. "Tonight, the price is what you have." Noah looked from Claire to Elijah, stunned into silence. Elijah's weathered face trembled. Not with fear this time. With relief so sudden it almost hurt. He lowered his gaze, swallowing hard, and for a few seconds the old man who had spent his life carrying steel, scrap, and pain seemed unable to carry words. Claire waited. Finally Elijah spoke. His voice came low and rough, the kind of truth that only appears when pride has already been stripped away. "Today is our 58th wedding anniversary," he said. "Martha, she saw that coat months ago when I took her to the clinic." His hands tightened inside his pockets. "She didn't ask for it. She just smiled and said if she ever wore something that beautiful, she'd feel young again." Noah stood perfectly still beside them, listening as though the entire city had narrowed into this one story. Elijah continued, each word slower than the last. "I've never bought her anything like that, not once. Factory closed, rent kept rising, life kept happening." He let out a breath that turned white in the cold. "So I worked every extra hour I could find. Scrap yards, snow, the depot, my knees half gone, but I kept thinking—" His voice broke. Claire's throat tightened. Elijah looked down at the pavement and whispered the sentence that would stay with her forever. "Life was never fair to me. I only want her to smile tonight." The city disappeared for Claire in that instant. All she could see was her father kneeling beside a mop bucket in an empty hotel corridor, shoulders heavy with the same invisible burden Elijah carried now. Years of work. Humiliation swallowed in silence. Love surviving where comfort never did. Claire looked away for a moment, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. Then she made the decision completely. "The missing 50, she said softly. "I'll cover it." Elijah lifted his head so suddenly that even Noah startled. "No, ma'am, I couldn't." "Yes, you can," Claire said with the quiet firmness of someone who had already chosen. "Tonight it's not charity. It's a wedding gift." Noah's face lit with something close to awe. For a 12-year-old who had grown up watching adults choose self-preservation over kindness, the moment felt almost unreal. Back inside the boutique on the security floor, Vanessa Cole stood near the office doorway, arms still folded but no longer confident. A younger assistant manager, Lena Morris, a petite Latina woman in her late 20s with short dark curls and quick observant eyes, had just informed her that Claire wanted her in the office immediately. Lena's calm tone carried enough weight to make Vanessa realize the cameras had seen everything. The color drained slightly from Vanessa's face. For the first time that day, she understood consequences were coming. Outside, Claire gestured gently toward the boutique. "Come with me," she said. Elijah hesitated only a second before nodding. Noah followed half a step behind, unable to hide the emotion shining in his young eyes. As they turned back toward the glowing storefront, Elijah pressed one hand briefly against his coat pocket, where the carefully bundled money still rested. For the first time since entering the store, those coins no longer felt like symbols of failure. They felt enough. The boutique doors opened once more, warm light spilling onto the winter sidewalk. And Elijah Brooks walked back toward the dream he thought he had already lost. The chapter closes exactly there, within the Chapter 5 summary, with Claire bringing Elijah back after deciding to personally cover the missing $50, Noah emotionally witnessing the kindness, and Vanessa being summoned upstairs to face what happened. By the time Elijah Brooks and Noah returned to the South Side, night had fully settled over Chicago. The city's polished downtown glow had long faded behind them, replaced once more by the familiar narrow alleyways, tired brick walls, and the distant hum of elevated trains rattling somewhere beyond the neighborhood. A thin snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow, dusting the crooked fences and sagging rooftops in white. Under the weak yellow street lamp near the alley entrance, the small wrapped box in Elijah's hands seemed to glow with a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside that box lay the turquoise blue coat, not behind glass, not beneath boutique lights. His. For Martha. Elijah held it carefully against his chest the entire walk home, as if every gust of winter wind might somehow steal it back. His knee ached fiercely now after the long walk downtown and back, but tonight the pain felt distant, muffled by something far stronger. Hope had weight, and he was carrying it home. Beside him, Noah Carter could barely contain his excitement. The 12-year-old kept glancing at the neatly tied boutique ribbon around the box, his bright brown eyes wide with wonder every time the street lamp caught the silver trim. "She's gonna cry," Noah whispered. Elijah smiled softly. "I think so too." But when they reached the final turn into the alley, Noah suddenly stopped. "Wait here," the boy said quickly. Before Elijah could ask why, Noah darted ahead into the darkness between the neighboring buildings, disappearing with the speed and secrecy only a child from that neighborhood could manage. Elijah frowned, amused but too tired to question it. He continued toward the house alone. What he did not know was that Noah had spent the past hour quietly gathering a few trusted neighbors. At the doorway of the next building stood Mrs. Evelyn Ross, a widowed black woman in her late 60s with a round face, warm smile, and a thick gray cardigan wrapped tightly around her sturdy frame. Years of raising 5 children in the same alley had made her practical, outspoken, and deeply protective of the people around her. She had known Elijah and Martha for more than 30 years. Beside her was Thomas Reed, a retired bus mechanic in his 70s, tall but stooped, with deep-set eyes and large, weathered hands that still smelled faintly of machine oil. Thomas rarely spoke much, but his loyalty to the neighborhood was quiet and absolute. Together with Noah, they had strung old Christmas lights and leftover wire decorations across the front steps of Elijah's tiny brick house. The bulbs were mismatched, some red, some yellow, a few blinking blue, but in the darkness of the alley they looked almost magical. By the time Elijah reached the front gate, the little house shimmered like a memory. He stopped. For a long moment, he simply stared. The sagging roof, the cracked brick wall, the crooked iron gate, all transformed by borrowed light and neighborly love. Noah emerged from behind the porch post, grinning proudly. "Anniversary decorations." Elijah's throat tightened. "Thank you," he said, voice low with emotion. Mrs. Ross waved a dismissive hand. "Go inside and give that woman her surprise before I start crying first?" The neighbors retreated into the night, leaving only the warm glow of the old lights behind. Inside, the house smelled of cabbage soup, toasted bread, and the faint sweetness of the candle Martha only lit on special evenings. Martha Brooks sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in her shawl, the small wooden box of wedding photographs already resting beside her plate as if she had planned to open it later. The soft lamplight caught the silver in her curls and deepened the gentleness in her lined face. When she looked up and saw Elijah standing there with a wrapped boutique box in both hands, her expression changed instantly. "Elijah?" He stepped closer, suddenly feeling shy in a way he had not felt since the day he first proposed. "This is for you," he said. Her eyes widened. Slowly, carefully, Martha lifted the lid. The tissue paper rustled softly. Then she saw it. The turquoise blue coat lay folded perfectly inside, the velvet collar catching the kitchen light in a shimmer of rich color. For a moment, Martha did not move. Her hands hovered above the fabric, trembling. She looked from the coat to Elijah and back again, as if afraid the dream might vanish if she blinked too hard. Then her fingers finally touched the sleeve. A sharp breath left her. Tears welled instantly in her dark, observant eyes. "Elijah," she whispered. The word broke in the middle. She lifted the coat from the box slowly, reverently, holding it against herself. Her tears spilled freely now, tracing silver paths through the years written into her face. "This is the most beautiful gift I have ever received," she said, voice shaking, "in all my life." Elijah stood silent, overwhelmed by the sight he had carried in his heart for months. Her smile. There it was, brighter than boutique chandeliers, warmer than any winter night. Martha looked down at the coat again, then up at him through tears that had softened into something almost playful. "You thought I didn't know, didn't you?" Elijah blinked. "Know what?" She smiled gently. "The coffee can, the extra hours, the way your knee hurt worse every night." Her expression turned tender. "I knew you were saving for something, I just didn't know it was this." Elijah let out a quiet laugh of surrender. "I wanted it to be a surprise." "It still is." She reached for his hand. For a moment neither spoke. The years between them filled the silence instead. Factory layoffs, hospital visits, rent notices, lost winters, broken heaters, patched coats, empty pockets, and every quiet act of love that had carried them here. Then Martha glanced toward the wooden wedding photo box on the table. "Help me with something," she said. A few minutes later, the tiny kitchen became something sacred. Martha carefully placed their old wedding photograph beside the open gift box, propping it against the sugar jar so it faced the table. In the faded image, they were young, hopeful, dressed in borrowed clothes and standing beneath summer sunlight. Now, 58 years later, they decided to honor that moment. Elijah disappeared briefly into the bedroom and returned wearing the same dark tie from their wedding day. Frayed, thinner now, but still intact, Martha slipped into a cream dress she had preserved in tissue paper all these years, its fabric aged and delicate. Then draped the turquoise coat over her shoulders. When she stepped back into the kitchen, Elijah forgot to breathe. She looked exactly as she had once promised. Young again, not in age, in spirit. The small dinner waiting on the table was simple. Thick slices of bread toasted over the stove, cabbage soup warmed in a dented pot, and one tiny white candle flickering between them. No expensive restaurant, no grand music, only warmth, memory, and devotion. They sat together at the old oak table, hands occasionally brushing as they ate. Outside, snow continued falling softly beyond the frosted window. The old lights Noah had strung blinked gently against the glass, and in the middle of the meal, Martha reached across the candlelight and squeezed Elijah's hand. No diamond, she said softly, glancing at the coat, could ever mean more than this. The chapter closes there, entirely within the Chapter 6 outline, with Martha receiving the coat, revealing she had long known about Elijah's savings, the wedding photo placed beside the gift, Noah and the neighbor's secret decorations glowing outside, and the two of them sharing a humble anniversary dinner in old wedding clothes. Morning arrived over the south side, wrapped in fresh snow and a strange kind of brightness. The alley that usually woke to the sound of rattling trash bins and coughing heaters now shimmered beneath a clean white layer. The mismatched string lights Noah had hung the night before still blinking softly against the pale dawn. For Elijah and Martha Brooks, the warmth of the anniversary dinner still lingered in the tiny brick house. The candle stub on the table, the wedding photograph beside the empty soup bowls, and the turquoise blue coat carefully draped over the back of Martha's chair, like proof that dreams sometimes arrived late, but not too late. Elijah had just stepped outside with a shovel to clear the front step when he heard unfamiliar car doors closing at the mouth of the alley. Not one, several. He turned. 3 dark company SUVs stood near the entrance where broken fences usually framed only old sedans and delivery vans. Out stepped Claire Bennett, followed by several employees from Evelyn's boutique carrying garment bags, gift boxes, and folders. Claire looked composed and radiant in a camel wool coat, her curls neatly framing her face despite the cold. But today there was something lighter in her expression, the calm satisfaction of someone who had watched kindness multiply overnight. Beside her walked Jasmine Lee, the boutique's public relations coordinator, a stylish Korean-American woman in her mid-30s with a sleek black bob, bright, intelligent eyes, and the quick, graceful confidence of someone used to shaping stories for the public. Years in media had made Jasmine highly observant, but unlike the polished superficiality of luxury branding, she genuinely believed stories should elevate overlooked dignity. Behind them came Lena Morris and 2 junior staff members carrying camera equipment and elegant wrapped boxes. Noah, already outside helping Thomas Reed brush snow from the gate, froze in place. His mouth fell open. "Mr. Brooks," he whispered, "you've got visitors." By then, neighbors had begun peeking through curtains and cracked doors. Mrs. Evelyn Ross emerged first, cardigan wrapped tight, curiosity already written across her warm face. Thomas followed, leaning slightly on his old mechanic's cane. The alley, so used to invisibility, suddenly felt like the center of the city. Claire stepped forward. "Good morning, Elijah." Elijah lowered the shovel slowly, confusion and caution mixing in his tired brown eyes. "Miss Bennett?" Claire smiled. "May we come in?" Inside the tiny house, the space quickly filled with warmth, steam from fresh tea, and a sense of unreality. Martha, still wearing the turquoise blue coat over her cream dress from the night before, looked stunned when she saw the elegant group entering the kitchen. Her silver curls framed a face still soft from last night's tears, but today there was fresh wonder in her eyes. Claire gestured toward Jasmine, who stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "Something happened after you left the boutique last night," Claire said. She glanced toward Elijah. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, the woman shopping near the scarf display, recorded part of what happened after Vanessa humiliated you. She didn't post the cruelty. She posted what came after. The walk back into the store. Your story? The reason for the coat? Jasmine turned the tablet around. The video showed Elijah re-entering the boutique beside Claire, his hands trembling as he spoke about Martha and their anniversary. Margaret had added only one caption. After 58 years of struggle, he only wanted his wife to smile. Chicago, do better. The video had exploded overnight. Thousands of shares, local media pickup, community groups demanding support for elderly laborers, comments pouring in from across the country. Martha covered her mouth. Elijah stood speechless. Claire reached into the folder Lena was holding and withdrew an elegant cream envelope embossed with the boutique's gold crest. She handed it to Martha. Inside was a lifetime boutique gift certificate granting her access to clothing from Evelyn's boutique for the rest of her life. Martha stared at it, hands trembling worse than they had when she first touched the coat. "For me?" she whispered. Claire nodded. "For every year, life gave you less than you deserved." The room fell into a silence so full it almost felt sacred. Then Claire turned toward Elijah and Noah. "After last night, the boutique owners met before sunrise," she said. "We're launching a permanent support fund for elderly workers in underserved communities." Jasmine stepped forward and opened another folder. On the top page, printed in elegant script, were the words, "The Elijah and Martha Anniversary Fund." Elijah's breath caught. The fund would provide emergency rent assistance, winter repairs, clothing support, and food stipends for elderly laborers still working past retirement age across Chicago's poorest neighborhoods. Mrs. Ross let out an audible gasp. Thomas Reed removed his cap in quiet respect. The alley had never seen anything like this. Then came the moment Elijah had not expected. Claire looked toward Noah. The boy straightened immediately, red wool cap crooked over his curls. "For what you did," Claire said, "for helping Elijah save, for looking after your neighbors, and for showing more heart than many adults ever learn." Lena handed Claire a navy folder. Inside was a scholarship certificate. Noah's eyes widened so fast the entire room laughed softly through tears. "A full education scholarship," Claire said, smiling warmly, "funded by the new foundation." Noah looked as if the floor had vanished beneath him. "Me? Yes, you." The boy turned instinctively toward Elijah and Martha, as if needing a confirmation from the people who had become his moral compass. Martha's eyes were already wet again. But Claire was not finished. She stepped toward Elijah. "The Neighborhood Association also reached out this morning. They want to name you the honorary caretaker of the Southside Community Block." Elijah frowned in disbelief. Claire continued. "They said no one has shoveled more snow, carried more coal, fixed more gates, or checked on more elderly neighbors than you." Mrs. Ross laughed through tears. "About time somebody made it official." Even Elijah had to smile. Outside, the alley had now filled with neighbors gathering in coats and scarves, drawn by the vehicles, the lights, and the growing sense that something extraordinary was happening. Jasmine's team stepped outside to set up a small ceremony. Noah, still clutching the scholarship folder like treasure, was handed a lightweight camera rig. Jasmine knelt to his height and smiled. "Would you like to film today?" Noah's grin stretched wider than Elijah had ever seen. Thus the boy became the videographer of the celebration, his hands steady despite the emotion. It felt perfect. A child who had collected cans for love, now preserving a miracle for memory. By noon, the alley had transformed into a festival. Neighbors brought folding chairs, soup pots, bread, and flowers rescued from corner stores. Someone set up an old speaker playing soft jazz. Snow glittered on rooftops as children laughed between the parked cars. Claire quietly informed Elijah that the foundation had already approved full repairs for the leaking roof, including insulation and heating support before the next storm. Martha touched the wall beside the window, as if she could already feel the future warming. Then came the final surprise. A professional photographer arrived from the boutique with a portable backdrop. Martha wore a new elegant cream and blue ensemble chosen by Claire's team to complement the turquoise coat. Elijah wore a freshly tailored dark suit donated overnight by the boutique's menswear partner. Together, beneath the blinking alley lights, they recreated their wedding portrait after 58 years, this time with wrinkles, with history, with proof that endurance could still look beautiful. Later that week, Jasmine promised, the new photograph would be displayed in the front window of Evelyn's boutique beside the original turquoise coat display. A love story where luxury once met judgment would now greet every passerby. As for Vanessa Cole, Claire addressed it with quiet firmness before the gathered neighbors. Vanessa, pale and visibly shaken, stood in a simple dark coat near the edge of the alley. She offered a public apology to Elijah and Martha, voice trembling as she admitted she had judged what she did not understand. Afterward, she was formally removed from customer-facing service and reassigned pending retraining. No celebration was built on revenge, only accountability. The chapter closes on the perfect happy ending promised in the outline. The entire neighborhood gathered in joy. Noah filming the ceremony as the next generation. Elijah honored by the community. Martha gifted a lifetime of dignity. Their roof secured for the future. And their new wedding photograph destined for the boutique window, turning one moment of cruelty into a legacy of compassion. Here is a gentle truth this story leaves with us. In everyday life, we often meet people whose clothes look old, whose hands are rough, or whose voices seem too quiet for the world to notice, but behind those tired hands may be years of sacrifice, love, and silent battles we know nothing about. Elijah's story reminds us that dignity should never be measured by money, appearance, age, or skin color. The way we treat the elderly, the poor, and those who serve quietly around us says everything about our own character. A small act of kindness can change not only one day, but an entire life. Claire chose compassion over judgment, and that single decision became hope for a whole community. In our daily lives, we all have moments where we can choose to look down on someone or lift them up. Choose kindness. Choose patience. Choose respect. That is how real change begins, one human heart at a time. This story also teaches us that true love is not built by expensive things, but by years of faithfulness, sacrifice, and the desire to make someone smile even after life has been unfair. A gift given with dignity, honesty, and love will always shine brighter than diamonds. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in love, kindness, and human dignity. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. And if you believe love and respect can still heal the world, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your home with peace, health, and love. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Stories That Change Lives so we can continue bringing meaningful stories that inspire everyday life.